Our next session is a clinical trial readiness. And from the sessions yesterday, we heard that there are drugs on the horizon. We've got a team talking to pharma right now, and we need to figure out what is the best approach for our families and what that means, what clinical trials mean for our families and our kids. Also, just to note, we're putting together a blog of this information. It'll be on the SYNGAP1 website if you want to just review the information or think about it. There'll be more details on the website. So what is a clinical trial? So there's multiple types of clinical trials, but in general, it's a controlled protocol in order to test a specific intervention. And it's usually for drugs or other treatments. And it could be a lot of different things, like a ketogenic diet or an ASO or an AAV when we think about these things, but it's generally interventional. So if you hear the difference between an interventional, it means you're trying a new treatment as opposed to an observational study, which we've also done within our community. So being able to observe people without necessarily doing intervention, but just to gather data. So these studies can be funded by pharmaceutical companies, by patient advocacy groups, by other institutions, as long as they kind of follow the same mechanism of gathering data. So the goal of a clinical trial is to determine if a specific treatment is safe, does it work, and what is the right dose, and what is the benefit that we're getting from a specific treatment. And in order to make sure that the treatments are safe for our kids, it's a very long process of making sure that a treatment is effective. So these are the stages of drug treatment from the preclinical stage. We heard a few of these yesterday, all the way up to multiple stages of clinical trials that are required for FDA approval. So new treatment must successfully navigate through all of these clinical trial phases before being approved for use in our kids. So these are a lot of different stages that have a lot of different gatekeepers, but what to point out here is this does take time. It does take time, and it does take a lot of participation. So the phases narrow down to these different purposes and the focus for our families. So as we're thinking about ASO treatments coming down the pipeline, it might not necessarily be available to everybody right away because there are criteria in order to include different individuals. So the first therapies may include older children or adults first. That's not necessarily a bias, but it's just to maintain a level of safety within that first population as younger children are more vulnerable. So the second phase would be to explore, again, safety, but early signs of benefit. And this can include older children. At phase 3, generally it's really looking for efficacy. Not just is it safe, but are we measuring meaningful differences? And that is one major thing that Secure SYNGAP has been focusing on. What do we measure? How do we measure it? And is it meaningful to our community? And then for the phase 4, it's a long-term safety, and it's generally a larger rollout and usually globally. So if you're enrolling in a clinical trial, if you're considering a clinical trial, there are a couple of different components to consider, and they will all be outlined in a clinical trial plan. So who can join, the inclusion or exclusion criteria, and that'll generally include things like age or seizure frequency. If you've joined some of our small molecule clinical trials, you'll be familiar with that, who can participate, and the easiest thing to measure really is seizures. So that is one of the main criteria that you're probably familiar with. And that clinical protocol will outline what procedures are performed, what data is collected, and how the results will be analyzed and how that data will be used. So before you even consider participating in a clinical trial, you'll have a full understanding of what is required, which will be clinic visits potentially, home visits maybe, what type of tests you'll be going through, whether that's an EEG, and how that data will be analyzed to make sure that you're comfortable with that so you can make an informed decision before you decide to participate. So these are kind of the safeguards that protect our families. So there's an institutional review board, which is a community of specialists and community members, doctors and scientists that review the clinical protocol to make sure that it's safe and the families understand what they're participating in. You have to approve, providing informed consent, to say that you understand the whole process. You can leave the trial at any time, but it's really to ensure that you understand what you're getting into. And then that clinical trial, the data from the clinical trial is also monitored. There's a safety Data Safety Monitoring Board, and medical, as well as medical oversight that provides review of the entire clinical trial while it's going on to make sure if there are any safety risks that the trial can be stopped or adjusted. And confidentiality of whoever's participating in that clinical trial is always protected. So this is the general traditional clinical trial design. The study is designed, it's conducted, and then there's an analysis. We have an extremely small community, and we don't want to go through an entire analysis always without having an adjustment based off of maybe something that we're observing within the clinical trial. So generally for rare disorders, because there are very few participants, we work with an adaptive clinical trial model. So this may be something to consider that while the study is being conducted, there may be a review, there may be an adaptation, things might change, and we continue on with the analysis. So there are possibilities of making changes to dosage, different series of treatments, just to make sure that your child is safe and that the benefit they're getting from the clinical trial is maximized. There's also something called an open label extension, which means after the main study is conducted and there's follow-up, there is an open label extension where everybody in the study has access to the drug. So for many clinical protocols, there is a placebo arm, which means there's an active, some of the participants get an active drug, some of the participants get a placebo. It's not an active drug. That will be blinded, you don't know who that is, and that's in order to determine if we're seeing a difference for those that have the drug compared to those that don't. But in an open label extension, everyone can access the drug. So everyone at that point receives treatment. So that is a benefit of joining a clinical trial to access the open label extension where you will have access to the drug regardless of what group you were in initially. And this leads to the natural history study, which we'll touch on a little bit later. It's not a clinical trial protocol. It's what we do with PROMISE, what we do when we fill out those surveys, and it gives us an understanding of how the symptoms change naturally, so we understand the natural progression in relationship to how the treatment affected our kids. And just to mention that each family's contribution and our community engagement with our clinical partners and the industry partners is so important as we have such a small population. So there are multiple types of treatments in development. You've heard of some of these. There's 2 genetic therapies, different types of genetic therapies that are being developed. Antisense oligonucleotides, I can't even say it and I'm a scientist. ASOs, and those are very short modifying, not durable treatment that will modify or provide a genetic boost in some cases. It's generally intrathecal, so injected directly into the central nervous system, and it requires repeated dosing. So this treatment has to occur over time, but it is generally considered a relatively safe procedure because it has been done so many times, and there have been quite a few ASOs that have been trialed for different conditions. AAVs are another treatment, and this could be considered a durable treatment. So this would be a gene editing approach in which the actual SYNGAP gene is fixed so that the child at whatever stage that they get the treatment progresses with a normal level of SYNGAP expression. And then we have small molecules, which I'm sure we're probably all familiar with treating our kids with different drugs that help mediate certain symptoms mostly. So just to highlight that the next thing that we're going to be facing, the decision point will probably be, do we want to consider an ASO trial? There are no current ASOs that are available for SYNGAP, but there will be soon. Just to make everybody feel, understand where these different treatments are, there are multiple different conditions that are being evaluated with multiple different companies that are multiple different stages of clinical trials. These have gone through safety reviews, these have gone through understanding the efficacy, so we know how these will work in certain conditions. And what researchers have seen is encouraging. Again, these are not necessarily things that are going to cure the disease, but they have observed better seizure control, improved motor abilities, more consistent sleep, stronger communication, improved cognitive and daily functioning, and measurable gains in development and behavioral assessments for some of the kids. So this is promising, but again, we need to set our expectations on that the experiences that we might have may be different. So in general, How do we prepare for upcoming clinical trials? We need to get organized. We need to get our clinical records together. We just heard from Kelsey, one great way to do that is to get everything uploaded on the Citizen Health database. So having all those medical records together really makes an attractive package in order to be able to understand how changes may occur. Plan for logistics. It can be time-consuming. We have several families that have experienced clinical trials, so talk amongst yourselves what that experience was like, how much time it took, how much travel it took, what the clinic visits were like. Each clinical trial is going to be different, but it is a time commitment. Stay informed, and there's multiple ways that we push information out into the community. There is a Connect registry for Syngap where we provide information directly about what opportunities are available. Mike's always very good about providing information on his podcast. If you can keep up with the fast pace of everything that he says, it's usually in there. Attend the webinars and check out the website for the different opportunities. There's a trial portal there where you can keep up with those. And ask questions. If you are interested in evaluating a type of treatment, you have the full ability to ask as many questions as you want until you feel comfortable with potentially joining or considering that opportunity. So what will that be like for each visit? How will my privacy be protected? And what are the different protections for my child? And it can be an emotional process just because it is a time commitment. It's very emotionally demanding. Not everybody can participate, and those that can, we're not quite sure what to expect in some cases, and we hope we see improvements. That is the end of my just primer for clinical trial readiness.